I think we also have good number of people here, so I will pass it over to Ivan, who will share his journey with Feld and how he's using it to assess sites for installing wind turbines.
All right, thank you, Anna.
I'm gonna stop sharing. Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Ivan Babashev. I am a senior project developer at Emerald. We're a renewable energy project developer consultant company. So basically, we build out utility scale renewables projects, and what that means is essentially we're involved in the entire process, everywhere from looking at a map of the United States and thinking about where in the country we would want to go to build a new wind farm or solar project, and all the way, and we do all the work up until we actually send out a construction team who goes out and erects these large infrastructure projects, so like large towers or solar panels. And as you can imagine, that requires a lot of diligence, that requires a lot of research into who owns the land, who, where are these things going to go, so that when the construction team actually gets to site, there's no problems. No one is chasing anyone off saying get off my property. Everything is basically checked off. So if you think about it, it's similar to like real estate development as well. Like basically it starts from nothing, and then we end up working on building out a project. So that's what we do. So we do everything from greenfielding to notice to proceed for construction. And as you can imagine, renewables are an inherently geographic resource. And so, compared to maybe some more traditional energy sources where you can bring the resource, whether it's oil or coal, you can bring that resource closer to where you want to use it, and therefore placing whatever placing whatever energy resource close to where you want to use it. Renewables are a little bit different, so you have to actually collect the energy where it's being produced. So if it's wind, where the wind blows; where it's solar, it's where the sun shines. And then you have to find out where that power is going. And then you have to also figure out how you're going to get from point A to point B. And so these are kind of the real fundamental questions that we need to ask, especially at a high level, in order to do our job in greenfielding and identifying where we want to site wind turbines and wind farms. So actually, I wanted to share, I think it's probably, you guys are here to look at maps, which I also love doing. So I think having a good visual reference to it would be helpful here. And Felt is a great tool that we use in order to actually collaborate on doing both the high level stuff, so kind of where in the country do we want to go, but also the project specific things as to understanding who owns the land, what the status of a project is, what are the different details, where the roads are going to go, how we're going to connect these turbines into the electrical grid. So a lot of our work, especially on the back end before we go into a map, is the creative strategic work. So we think about markets, we think about infrastructure, and then we decide to pull all those resources together, all those ideas together to identify specific sites. So yeah, I mean, just to reiterate a couple of the questions that we answer in our, there we go. Let me just make that a little bit smaller. So yeah, in our industry is, where's the resource? Where's the power going? So where's the resource? You can see here, this is a wind layer, a publicly available wind layer from NREL that we share in Felt. Where is the power going? For example, urban areas. We want to see, as you can see, that there's, we have the coasts is where most people live. And sometimes, as you can tell, where people live and where the wind blows is not usually the same place. We can also look at it, we can look at solar, we can look at wind as a raster, which shows a little bit more granularity. Although I think at this very high level, the polygons also show a pretty, pretty fair representation, especially when you're looking into buckets of different projects and wind speeds. And then we also need to know who owns the land. So we use all sorts of different resources for parcel data, and that, and felt is a great way to actually bring all those things together. And then finally, the constraints that apply to a project. So that can be, here we have like a critical habitats. So we're typically going to stay away from any kind of critical habitats that that may obstruct, we don't want to interfere with, the whole reason why we're doing what we're doing is to, combat climate change. And of course, we want to be a net benefit to the environment. And so we're obviously avoiding any kind of habitats that we might be infringing on, whether it's eagles, whether it's, sage grouse is one that comes up a lot. So critical habitats is one of the constraints. Military training routes is something that we take a look at. So this is like any kind of military installations or flight paths, which is particularly important when you're building tall structures such as wind turbines. So yeah, this is so a typical process here would be, we'll look at a map, we'll have an idea of where we want to go. And so I've got a kind of a sample here is, for example, we would want to go to, looks like it's pretty windy in Wyoming. So we would go here and then, and what's great about Felt is that me as the GIS professional or like the GIS lead, I can compile all these layers into one place. I can save them as Emerald layers in Felt, and then my whole team can then load in these different layers as they wish at will. And it's very helpful because originally, before we had the opportunity to work with Felt, everything would kind of go through in kind of a GIS person. So there would be a request for a map, or say there was a piece of land. It's like, okay, what's the wind on this area? And it would always go through one individual, but this kind of democratizes the ability to use something like to use mapping tools, which are so fundamental to what we do. So another kind of layer that we look into is transmission. So when I mentioned earlier, how do we get things from point A to point B? That's basically this large network of cables going all over the country. So that's something that we also particularly, look into, and that helps us identify where we want to go. The grid is actually split up into all these different regions and interconnections. And so that's another geographic parameter that really narrows down the scope and tells us how we want to think about projects, where we want to go. And so, yeah, so when our team has a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different strengths, each individual has their own strengths. And so what that means is that people think in different ways. And especially on a high level and strategic front, if every request goes through one individual who's doing the mapping, say asking, hey, what does this particular area look like? It ultimately, there's a certain level of the game of telephone that happens, because the one individual who's sharing the map will then communicate that information back to the person who's asking the questions. But Felt allows anyone on the team who might be thinking about projects strategically to actually make those inquiries themselves and be able to see things that potentially someone who is a mapping expert might not be thinking about. So that's what Felt is particularly helpful for. So I wanted to kind of, so this is an overview of kind of the high level things that we do. And like I said, we also go into very, more detailed approaches. So for example, here's that area in Wyoming. This is, something we're able to do is pull in any kind of parcel data. And one thing that has been really great has been the filter function. because we look for typically large landowners. And here, the filter function, we can, look at acres. We can see, okay, well, who owns large parcels? Let's start with, let's see, 5,000 acres. 5,000 acres is a lot, but look, as we look into 5,000 acres, we can see that it starts narrowing things down. We can even see, if it's too broad, we can see 10,000 acres. Okay, so we're starting to see that there are some very large landowners here in Wyoming that we might be interested in reaching out to. So I wanted to move on to this kind of second use case, which is, I would say, on the further end of the spectrum. So if we started at a very high level, where in the country we want to go, the next step is, this would be further along the project. Say we've gone to the area, we've talked to landowners. There's some that are interested, some we're talking to, and there's definitely a range of information that a range of topics that mapping really helps with. And I think this is where Felt has been particularly useful, specifically with having a team that has various levels of GIS experience, and particularly having to do with sending out maps that identify specific landowners. So here we have, I'll do this background. It's a little bit easier to see. So for example, here is a, get that out of the way there. Here is a sample project. Actually, I think I have some wind farms here. This is kind of how we project a wind farm to look. But potentially we want to send a letter or talk to a lawyer about a specific landowner. And so one thing we can do, and every parcel will have like an associated land ID, or parcel ID associated with. So we can isolate each individual landowner, which is very helpful for folks who, that's been one of the most common requests that I got as a GIS lead and GIS person on our team is, can you make a map of this landowner and see how close they are to the transmission line, or see, look, we want to build a road going through this landowner's property. Can you please show which parcels that affects, how long of a crossing that is? So for example, what I showed earlier was this route. Potentially we want to negotiate some kind of a right of way that would go through these parcels. So then we can basically create a static map that would show, okay, so this is the Farthing Branch Company. These are Farthing Branch Company parcels. The right of way will cross these particular parcels. I like the pop-up that is customizable. You can see all the different details here, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another typical use case for Felt, especially collaboratively. So the different categorization is super helpful as well. For example, land status is another way of looking at a project, where you can, again, a question that gets asked a lot is, okay, so what's actually signed? Like who have we spoken with in the area who is willing to work with us, who's willing to host a wind farm? And this is an easy way for us to have a view of what the status of the project is. So it can be either signed, we can find out who we're negotiating with, who maybe who's maybe been a more challenging person to work with. However, we still want to talk to them. They might be a key personnel to the key person for the project, key land position. So that's another example just of a use case. What's been great is that in the past, we've used other tools, and those other tools have gotten us, I would say, about 60% of the way there. A lot of times having to do with actually customizable layers. So sometimes the layers are there, but being able to only choose the layers that we need, having them appear in the way that we need them to appear, has always been helpful. And also being able to pull in layers here that are custom made by us, so that we're not always recreating the wheel. We're able to actually upload the kind of things that we're interested in. So yeah, and I would say a big use case, kind of round this out, as like a final big use case for what we do is that we bring together uh, data sources or data from all sorts of different sources. And I would say fundamentally, this is a platform that we use to manage projects visually. And all these different and the information that we get from different sources are from subject matter experts such as biologists, uh, people from the military, people from the kind of the infrastructure like the grid, people who run the grid. So, for example, we might send out a biologist to see, all right, well, are there any animals that we need to be aware of that maybe this public critical habitat layer didn't work or didn't capture? So we might get a full report of all the different animals in the area, and then have a GIS component to it. And so I've got a sample data set. That we can actually take a look at. So for example, say that the biologist comes back and says, we found eagle nests. And so we can load them in, we can take a look at them, we can see if they're, in any public lands that we need to be aware of. And having this all in one place is supremely powerful. It's great, not just for me as a GIS expert, but also for the rest of the team, because one of the things that Felt fixes is that bottleneck of having someone who can actually visualize what's going on. For example, like one thing that can come up is there an existing wind farm in the area? And as we can see down here, this is an existing wind turbine site, which is also publicly available data. So I did want to open up for questions because this is a pretty, there's a wide range of things that I've talked about here and different use cases. And I do want to reiterate the use cases that are most helpful. So one is being able to see things at a high level using publicly available data. The whole team gets to see that kind of see those maps, gets to interact with those maps. I think even as basic as being able to turn layers off and on without having to go through a GIS person. I think that's a huge use case. Another use case is pulling together resources from SMEs, subject matter experts such as biologists. A third use case is making land ownership maps. I think I actually didn't show a layer here that I really like, but this is the kind of how the legal description of land is structured. So a typical land map would have the gridding that the nation is under, and being able to see the constraints that affect our project, and finally, really it's all about suitability. It's all about finding the right place that has the wind resource, figuring out where that power is going, and figuring out how we're going to get that power from point A to point B, which is the fundamental problem that we're trying to fix here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ivan. I wanted to open it to questions. Let me just share my screen for a bit to make sure we see the questions on our map. Just a sec. Oh, sorry. Here we go. So here are some questions. Some folks are typing. This is great. This is a map where we're gathering all the questions. So if you have a question for Ivan, please just join us on the map. The link is in the chat. But yeah, good to see some questions from the audience. Let's start probably with this one about QGIS. I know a lot of people in the audience are using QGIS. Curious about the way it works in your workflow.
Yeah. So I started doing GIS using QGIS. I started as a freelance consultant, which is why it's always been the go-to software. And until Felt, everything was done in QGIS, and now the primary use case for QGIS is the data manipulation. It's actually a lot of the exploration does happen kind of behind the scenes on QGIS. It's for example, manipulating the data so that, for example, with land ownership, we can calculate areas like acreages and create those attributes associated with each landowner. We can, like the status map, the land status map I showed, that's all done in Q because it's we use it to actually fix that behind essentially the data, create the data that we then load into Felt. I'd say right now that's the primary use for QGIS. A lot of times we'll do the mapping, so like the actual cartography in QGIS as well, although we have a number of different tools that we use, but a lot of the cartography is in QGIS. Typically I would say, just because my familiarity with QGIS is pretty high, that's usually the final stop if there really needs to be something that is finely detailed, finely tuned. A lot of fine tuning happens in QGIS.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, next up we have a question about embeds. Do you embed these maps that you create in documents when you share them? And if yes, which ones? Yeah, and I think this question is also around like formats and export. What kind of format to use for export, or is it kind of dynamic embeds? Just curious about that.
Right. Well, we don't do dynamic embeds particularly much. Normally we'll do, I'll combine question 2 with question 4, I think, which is, do we submit these maps to the government for licensing the wind farm? So it can be the government, it can be a legal firm. So we can use the Felt maps to submit to the government. What we use is, for example, Canva, to just use screenshots. That's been the main use of how to convert a Felt map into something that is professional. It's got the frame, it's got the legend. But I think for the most part, we use Felt either internally or with clients a lot. And that we can just send a link back and forth, and that can be very, very useful and very helpful. But for documentation, typically, we can do, there's nothing we can't really screenshot from Felt and then put it into a document with a caption. That also works. Simple as that.
Great. Thank you so much. Next up, we have a question about data. Curious if you use like Felt data layers or some kind of open data portals. So how does it work kind of between the layer libraries that is available in Felt and more proprietary data?
Right. So we get data from all over the place. So everywhere from publicly available data, like I said, from, for example, NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Lab. We'll get data from, so sometimes we'll use that was actually really, when we first started using Felt, this was great. The fact that Felt did have the transmission layers. It has a land cover layer. So for example, if you want to see, forested areas, we want to avoid forested areas, so that, that we can pull up. Public lands is something that is already in Felt, which is something that we use a lot because we want to avoid public lands. Typically we'll build on private land. So that's all stuff that's actually already built into Felt. And you can see if you go to general, or I think actually the infrastructure one, transmission lines.
Here we go. We can
get
it to our mind, actually.
Transmission lines, like things like cities, things like like town boundaries. Those are all things that Felt already has. And then landowner data we usually get from the county, like county by county. And then, as I noted before, things like what biologists bring back, for example, hey, there's these kind of these eagle nests, or this lizard has a habitat here that was maybe not considered in like a publicly available layer. We'll get those in, say, KMZ form. And this has been something that, with Felt has been great. I think from the beginning, the kind of upload anything feature has been super helpful. I've seen in some other tools, I've been in the position where you're allowed to add the data, but it, for example, can be in KMZ format, but not in KML format, which sometimes people use those interchangeably. And then that just means that I have to go and reformat the file and then bring it back in. And also I like that the export feature is a GeoJSON, which is a single file, which is great because people on my kind of side of the fence are totally used to shape files having 5 different files associated with it. But people outside of my community or our kind of GIS community don't really understand why there's. I mean, it's hard to get a sense of why there's five layers that just are one shape file. So yeah, that's another, I think, good functionality of Felt is the upload and download anything, or the upload anything and then downloading in a GeoJSON.
Great. And then we also have a question about filters. I think it's fairly new, so
Yeah,
curious if you use it and how it works. So I might even stop sharing if you have something to share around filters.
sure. Yeah, let's go with filters. I think, see if okay, so filters, a big one that we use filters for is land stuff, because so if you go to any layer that you're interested in filtering, perhaps, yeah, you would go to this filter area and then you can add a filter. And I would say we use it in I would say two big ways. One way is to see who large landowners are, like I said before. So if you find the acres field, that's how, yeah, so you change the acreage, you can change to greater than. So we're interested in, say, acres greater than 10,000, and then that's what we see. Say this is, we want something to be a bit more stuck together, and so we can then narrow things down. Okay, 500 or 5,000 acres, we're starting to see more of a cluster that's contiguous. So we typically look for contiguous land. And yeah, so we kind of use this one as a sliding scale to right size the kind of projects that we're looking for. The reason we look for large landowners is the larger the landowner, the less people we actually have to work out a lease with. So yeah, that's one big use for a filter. And then once, say, we have a project in mind, we can use the filter to look at landowners. So let me see if I can find a case of this. So even with, so I showed earlier how I already had this this layer here with the different landowners. I actually was able to create this with a filter. And so if we go to pick this up a little bit so we can actually see it. Let's get rid of all the other layers that are not relevant. Here, yeah, you can look for a filter that is, so say we've already identified True Ranches, Farthing Ranch, and Whitaker. So you can add a filter of, I think, a name. So you identify where, and then you have a whole list of all the different possibilities, all the different landowners that you have. You can start adding like True. Oh, so here's another case. So for example, True Ranch and True Ranches with a comma, or True Ranches and True Ranches without a comma. are probably the same landowner. And so when you add them together, see, you can actually pick up on different slight variations in landowners.
Can please everyone in the audience mute themselves? It looks like there is some sound. Okay, perfect. Sorry, we need to just make sure that there are no additional sounds. But yeah, looks like it just helps the search and filtering helps identify some of the landowners and like data that is a little bit that is overlapping, right?
Yep. Well, I mean, this is what the filter kind of came up with. And this is say I have an idea of who I want to, who I'm interested in. And then what I noticed is when actually preparing for this is you can actually create a new layer by, so you can update, so if we do name, so in your categorizing, you can go to statistics based on unfiltered data, but then you can update in a new layer. And that's super helpful because once I'm done with the filter and I've created the filter that I'm interested in, then I no longer need to, to use. So I no longer need to, to use the original data set, and I can only, just use the project area that I'm interested in is a new layer. And that I can start exporting. So for example, here I can just export to a geo package, and that's when I'll take things into QGIS and start really looking at, creating a land status field, creating, maybe taking, so here we can see all the different attributes. I don't really need all of these attributes. So some of the attribute filtering, like culling, culling these features, I'll do all that in QGIS, and then I'll re-upload it into something that looks more like this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this demonstration. It's a really cool use case for layers. We just launched it recently, so it's really interesting to see how folks are using it. Okay, we have another great question here about competitors. This question is, do you run into competitors going after the same land, or does GIS or FELT help you convince landowners? How does this kind of play into the sales process or like negotiations? Really curious about that. That's a really great question.
Right. Yeah, that is a great question. I think that's one of the things that, I would say sets us apart in some ways, is that our approach to mapping, especially when it's landowner facing or client facing, is a cartographic mindset. So when we do approach a landowner, and I think this is something that we see happen quite a bit when people use GIS tools, is throwing as much data as you possibly, everything relevant onto a map, make sure that the colors are different, and then ship it off. So what we do is we are pretty careful about what we share with landowners in terms of not just not sharing them too much information, but actually showing them the right information, showing them the relevant information, and also, so our team will go out and actually meet with landowners with farmers around their dinner table, and typically we'll bring a map along with it. And one of our goals, especially when we create maps for landowners, is to make the map so appealing that after when we're leaving the table, that the farmer would ask to keep the map. I would consider it a great success if they keep the map and want to hang it in their room, or because they love their land, they love their property. And so when they see someone who comes to their home and treats their property with the respect that they also, they know that it deserves, in the form of making their land beautiful in the form of a map, that definitely helps us convince them to go with us uh, instead of anyone else. But yeah, I would say that's the main thing, is that we use GIS and as more of it's more than just a analysis tool. It's a communication tool. It's something that people will gather around a map, and it helps. It helps people, instead of sitting across from each other in an adversarial form, is to kind of get on the same side and look in one direction and look at that map. Kind of puts people on the same team.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much for this answer. I think I love the communication tool angle. I feel like it's a really big part of working with maps and kind of being effective when you are working with maps. That's really great point. Well, and lastly, we have this question about transitioning to Felt and kind of onboarding your team. Did you have any challenges or any kind of tips that you might have for anyone thinking about transitioning to Felt? I think it's a great question. Really curious how it worked out for Emerald when you just started.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been looking into some kind of collaborative mapping for a long time. I think even since I started with Emerald, there was always this idea, this hope, that we would get to a point where essentially basic questions like, hey, can you make a map of the landowner and the transmission line, with this parcel and a transmission line? Actually, another great use of filter is if you just want a specific parcel. But yeah, can you make it with the transmission line and the landowner? And I say sure. I'll send over the map, and then it's like, oh well, actually, can we actually take out the transmission line and add the the military training route? Or can you actually add the eagle's nest? We kind of want to know. And that, okay, I'll go in, I'll do that, send it back. And so that kind of friction would sometimes it'll create a bottleneck. It create delays both internally and externally, that when we got into Felt, I think immediately that was the value add, was the fact that I could make a central project map, all that in QGIS, load it up into Felt the way we had discussed it. We can sit down and work on this project together, and then the project developer would be able to go and turn things on and off at will. And I think that was the main selling point at first. And so, but one of the things is, as things have been progressing and the use cases have been evolving, there's definitely been requests of like, can Felt do this? Can Felt do this? And even when Felt did not have the capability, somehow eventually, even if it's 2 or 3 months down the line, that functionality actually came to Felt. So I think that was the main selling point. Also, I think more deeply into the transition, that really solidified it, is that there is an active support. There's active support for Felt, which is not something that we saw in our other tools. A lot of Felt also provides us a way to do everything in one place, especially on the collaborative front, because before we had different resources for very specific tasks, and Felt was able to at least consolidate probably 80 to 90% of those different tools.
Great. Thank you so much, Ivan. I know that we're out of questions here, but I wanted to also open up an opportunity for everyone to just unmute themselves. I know that everyone is currently muted, but you can unmute yourself on Zoom. And if you have any questions or anything that we didn't really discuss or cover, please unmute yourself and we'll we'll take a couple more questions as we have some time to answer them if you're curious about anything, either with Emerald's use case or just Felt roadmap, Felt features. We're happy to answer them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to intrude or any or
Yeah,
go
no,
over anything else.
go ahead, Carter. Thank you.
But I wanted to ask, I know that Felt is relatively new, all things considered. But what does the plugin and kind of community does Felt have a lot of plugins currently that have a use case, or what does that community kind of look like as far as additional I guess content or tools or anything, or is that still in kind of infancy?
I can answer this. Well, currently we have only two plugins. We have QGIS and we have Regrid, which is parcel data, that allows you, if you're purchasing data from Regrid, you can use that. But we also have our API. We don't have a really large library of use cases for the API, but we're seeing a really kind of like a fair amount of usage, and we'll definitely in the coming months we'll be covering a lot of like use cases for the API and kind of extending this functionality. This is definitely on our radar. So Carter, you can also just email us at like support@felt.com, curious to learn a little bit more about your use cases for the API and plugins, because it's definitely something that we are interested in expanding.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions? We have plenty of time actually, so if you haven't asked something on your mind, we're here to answer.
Ivan, at what point, thank you, Anna. Ivan, at what point do you transition from kind of using this for high level and get to, like really project specific development? Or do you not really use felt maps for project specific development and it's more for that initial discovery, prospecting, and pre-qualification phase? I know you covered this a little bit, but I'm curious because I work on rooftop solar and I can see the applicability for large scale and utility scale, but I think there's a lot of applicability there for smaller projects. But I'm just curious how that's kind of worked into your workflow.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily, it's kind of on a continuum. So I wouldn't say that there is a stage where it's exploration and where it goes into project specific. And we use Felt and GIS for the entirety of the process. And so I think after we look into just initial viability and we have an initial kind of a fatal flaw list, then it transitions into a project typically when we go out to site and start meeting with people who own the land. I would say that would be the most appropriate. I mean, that's kind of like the big transition when things go out of desktop world into the real world. So once we start developing areas of interest, once we start developing landowner lists, that kind of stuff. And we're able to use GIS. I mean, we use GIS for all of it, right? When we go out into the field, we have to know where we're going. We have to know where we're meeting people. And yeah, so I wouldn't say that there's a hard, transition from when it goes from the high level into project specific. But typically, we'll create an AOI that is bounded generally by land ownership. And once that is solid, and once that's not running into high level fatal flaws, that's when it's more project specific.
Got it. Thanks.